The Boshin War, sometimes known as the Japanese Revolution, was a civil war in Japan, fought from 1868 to 1869 between forces of the ruling Tokugawa shogunate and those seeking to return political power to the imperial court. The war found its origins in dissatisfaction among many nobles and young samurai with the shogunate's handling of foreigners following the opening of Japan during the prior decade. Increasing Western influence in the economy led to a decline similar to other Asian countries at the time. An alliance of Western samurai, particularly the domains of Chōshū, Satsuma and Tosa and court officials, secured control of the imperial court and influenced the young Emperor Meiji. Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the sitting shogun, realizing the futility of his situation, abdicated political power to the emperor. Yoshinobu had hoped that by doing this, the Tokugawa house could be preserved and participate in the future government. However, military movements by imperial forces, partisan violence in Edo, and an imperial decree promoted by Satsuma and Chōshū abolishing the House of Tokugawa led Yoshinobu to launch a military campaign to seize the emperor's court at Kyoto. The military tide rapidly turned in favor of the smaller but relatively modernized imperial faction, and after a series of battles culminating in the surrender of Edo, Yoshinobu personally surrendered. Those loyal to the Tokugawa retreated to northern Honshu and later to Hokkaido, where they founded the Edo Republic. Defeat at the Battle of Hakone broke this last holdout and left the imperial rule supreme throughout the whole of Japan, completing the military phase of the Meiji Restoration. Around 120,000 men were mobilized during the conflict, and of these about 3,500 were killed. In the end, the victorious imperial faction abandoned its objective to expel foreigners from Japan and instead adopted a policy of continued modernization with an eye to eventual renegotiation of the unequal treaties with the Western powers. Due to the persistence of Saigo Takamori, a prominent leader of the imperial faction, the Tokugawa loyalists were shown clemency, and many former shogunate leaders and samurai were later given positions of responsibility under the new government. When the Boshin War began, Japan was already modernizing, following the same course of advancement as that of the industrialized Western nations. But Japan protected its vulnerable economy by rejecting Western enforced free trade. And since those Western nations, especially Britain and France, were deeply involved in the country's politics, the installation of imperial power added more turbulence to the conflict. Over time, the war has been romanticized as a bloodless revolution, despite its large number of casualties. Political background. Early discontent against the shogunate. For the 2 centuries prior to 1854, Japan had severely limited exchange with foreign nations, with the notable exceptions of Korea via Tsushima, King China via the Ryukyu, and the Dutch through the trading post of Dejima. In 1854, Commodore Perry opened Japan to global commerce with the implied threat of force, thus initiating a period of rapid development in foreign trade and westernization, in large part due to the humiliating terms of the unequal treaties, as agreements like those conveyed by Perry recall. The shogunate soon faced internal hostility, which materialized into a radical movement, the Sonojoi. The Emperor Kome agreed with such sentiments, and, breaking with centuries of imperial tradition, began to take an active role in matters of state. As opportunities arose, he fulminated against the treaties and attempted to interfere in the shogunal succession. His efforts culminated in March 1863 with his order to expel barbarians. Although the shogunate had no intention of enforcing it, the order nevertheless inspired attacks against the shogunate itself and against foreigners in Japan. The most famous incident was that of the English trader Charles Lennox Richardson, for whose death the Tokugawa government had to pay an indemnity of £100,000. Other attacks included the shelling of foreign shipping in Shimonoseki. During 1864, these actions were successfully countered by armed retaliations by foreign powers, such as the British bombardment of Kagoshima and the multinational bombardment of Shimonoseki. At the same time, the forces of Chōshū, together with Ronin, raised the Hamaguri Rebellion, trying to seize the city of Kyoto, where the emperor's court was held, but were repelled by shogunate forces under the future shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu. The shogunate further ordered a punitive expedition against Chōshū, the first Chōshū expedition, and obtained Chōshū's submission without actual fighting. At this point, initial resistance among the leadership in Chōshū and the imperial court subsided, but over the next year the Tokugawa proved unable to reassert full control over the country as most daimyo began to ignore orders and questions from Edo. Foreign military assistance. Despite the bombardment of Kagoshima, the Satsuma domain had become closer to the British and was pursuing the modernization of its army and navy with the support. The Scottish dealer Thomas Blake Glover sold quantities of warships and guns to the southern domains. American and British military experts, usually former officers, may have been directly involved in this military effort. The British ambassador Harry Smith Parkes supported the anti-shogunate forces in a drive to establish a legitimate, unified imperial rule in Japan, and to counter French influence with the shogunate. During that period, southern Japanese leaders such as Saigo Takamori of Satsuma, or Ito Hirobumi and Inoue Kaoru of Chōshū cultivated personal connections with British diplomats, notably Ernest Mason Satow. The shogunate also was preparing for further conflict by modernizing its forces. In line with Parkes' designs, the British, theretofore the shogunate's primary partner, proved reluctant to provide assistance. The Tokugawa thus came to rely mainly on French expertise, comforted by the military prestige of Napoleon III at the time, acquired through his successes in the Crimean War and the War of Italy. The shogunate took major steps towards the construction of a modern and powerful military. A navy with a corps of 8 steam warships had been built over several years and was already the strongest in Asia. In 1865, Japan's first modern naval arsenal was built in Yokosuka by the French engineer Élie Verney. In January 1867, a French military mission arrived to reorganize the shogunal army and create the Denshutai elite force, and an order was placed with the United States to buy the French-built ironclad warship CSS Stonewall, a relic of the American Civil War. Due to the Western powers' declared neutrality, the Americans refused to release the ship, but once neutrality was lifted, the imperial faction obtained the vessel and employed it in engagements in Hakodate under the name Kotetsu. Coups-d'État following a coup within Chōshū which returned to power the extremist factions opposed to the shogunate. The shogunate announced its intention to lead a second Chōshū expedition to punish the renegade domain. This in turn prompted Chōshū to form a secret alliance with Satsuma. In the summer of 1866, the shogunate was defeated by Chōshū, leading to a considerable loss of authority. In late 1866, however, first shogun Iemochi and then Emperor Kome died, respectively, succeeded by Yoshinobu and Emperor Meiji. These events, in the words of historian Marius Jansen, made a truce inevitable. On November 9, 1867, a secret order was created by Satsuma and Chōshū in the name of Emperor Meiji, commanding the slaughtering of the traitorous subject Yoshinobu. Just prior to this, however, and following a proposal from the daimyo of Tosa, Yoshinobu resigned his post and authorities to the emperor, agreeing to be the instrument for carrying out imperial orders. The Tokugawa shogunate had ended, while Yoshinobu's resignation had created a nominal void at the highest level of government. His apparatus of state continued to exist. Moreover, the shogunal government, the Tokugawa family in particular, would remain a prominent force in the evolving political order and would retain many executive powers, a prospect hardliners from Satsuma and Chōshū found intolerable. Events came to a head on January 3, 1868, when these elements seized the imperial palace in Kyoto, and the following day had the 15-year-old Emperor Meiji declare his own restoration to full power. Although the majority of the Imperial Consultative Assembly was happy with the formal declaration of direct rule by the court and tended to support a continued collaboration with the Tokugawa, Saigatakamori threatened the assembly into abolishing the title shogun and ordering the confiscation of Yoshinobu's lands. Although he initially agreed to these demands, on January 17, 1868, Yoshinobu declared that he would not be bound by the Restoration Proclamation and called for its rescission. On January 24, he decided to prepare an attack on Kyoto, occupied by Satsuma and Chōshū forces. This decision was prompted by his learning of a series of arsons in Edo, starting with the burning of the outer works of Edo Castle, the main Tokugawa residence. This was blamed on Satsuma Ronin, who on that day attacked a government office. The next day shogunate forces responded by attacking the Edo residence of the daimyo of Satsuma, where many opponents of the shogunate, under Takamori's direction, had been hiding and creating trouble. The palace was burned down, and many opponents killed or later executed, opening conflicts. On the 27th of January 1868, shogunate forces attacked the forces of Chōshū and Satsuma, clashing near Toba and Fushimi, at the southern entrance of Kyoto. Some parts of the 15,000-strong shogunate forces had been trained by French military advisors, but the majority remained medieval samurai forces. Of those samurai forces there were the Shinzengumi. Meanwhile, the forces of Chōshū and Satsuma were outnumbered 3-1 but fully modernized with Armstrong howitzers, mini rifles and a few Gatling guns. After an inconclusive start, on the second day, an imperial banner was remitted to the defending troops, and a relative of the emperor, Ninnajinomiya Yoshiaki, was named nominal commander-in-chief, making the forces officially an imperial army. Moreover, convinced by courtiers, several local daimyo, up to this point faithful to the shogun, started to defect to the side of the imperial court. These included daimyo of Yodo on February 5, and a daimyo of Su on February 6, tilting the military balance in favor of the imperial side. On February 7, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, apparently distressed by the imperial approval given to the actions of Satsuma and Chōshū, fled Osaka aboard the Kaiyomaru, withdrawing to Edo. Demoralized by his flight and by the betrayal by Yodo and Su, shogunate forces retreated, making the Toba-Fushimi encounter an imperial victory. Although it is often considered the shogunate forces should have won the encounter, Osaka Castle was soon invested on February 8, putting an end to the Battle of Toba-Fushimi. At the same time, on the 28th of January 1868, the naval battle of Awa between the shogunate and elements of the Satsuma Navy took place. This was Japan's second engagement between two modern navies. The battle, although small in scale, ended in favor of the shogunate. On the diplomatic front, the ministers of foreign nations, gathered in the open harbor of Hyogo in early February, issued a declaration according to which the shogunate was still considered the only rightful government in Japan, giving hope to Tokugawa Yoshinobu that foreign nations might consider an intervention in his favor. A few days later, however, an imperial delegation visited the ministers declaring that the shogunate was abolished, that harbors would be open in accordance with the international treaties, and that foreigners would be protected. The ministers finally decided to recognize the new government. The rise of anti-foreign sentiment nonetheless led to several attacks on foreigners in the following months. 11 French sailors from the corvette Dupleix were killed by samurai of Tosa in the Sakai incident on March 8, 1868. 15 days later, Sir Harry Parkes, the British ambassador, was attacked by a group of samurai in a street of Kyoto. Surrender of Edo. Beginning in February, with the help of the French ambassador Eliacuto N. Roches, a plan was formulated to stop the Imperial Court's advance at Odawara, the last strategic entry point to Edo, but Yoshinobu decided against the plan. Shocked, Eliacuto N. Roches resigned from his position. In early March, under the influence of the British minister Harry Parkes, foreign nations signed a strict neutrality agreement, according to which they could not intervene or provide military supplies to either side until the resolution of the conflict. Saigo Takamori led the victorious imperial forces north and east through Japan, winning the Battle of Chōshū. He eventually surrounded Edo in May 1868, leading to its unconditional defeat after Katsugaishu, the shogun's army minister, negotiated the surrender. Some groups continued to resist after the surrender but were defeated in the Battle of Ueno on 4 July 1868. Meanwhile, the leader of the shogun's navy, Enomoto Takaki, refused to surrender all his ships. He remitted just 4 ships, among them the Fujisan, but he then escaped north with the remnants of the shogun's navy, and 2,000 members of the navy, in the hope of staging a counter-attack together with the northern daimyo. He was accompanied by a handful of French military advisors, notably Jules Brunet, who had formally resigned from the French army in order to accompany the rebels. Resistance of the Northern Coalition. After Yoshinobu's surrender, most of Japan accepted the emperor's rule, but a core of domains in the north, supporting the Aizu clan, continued the resistance. In May, several northern daimyo formed an alliance to fight imperial troops. The coalition of northern domains composed primarily of forces from the domains of Sendai, Yonezawa, Aizu, Shonai and Nagaoka, with a total of 50,000 troops. An imperial prince, Kitashirakawa Yoshihisa, had fled north with partisans of the Tokugawa shogunate and was made the nominal head of the northern coalition, with the intention of naming him Emperor Tabu. Enomoto's fleet joined Sendai harbor on August 26. Although the Northern Coalition was numerous, it was poorly equipped, and relied on traditional fighting methods. Modern armament was scarce, and last-minute efforts were made to build cannons made of wooden reinforced with roping, firing stone projectiles. Such cannons, installed on defensive structures, could only fire 4 or 5 projectiles before bursting. On the other hand, the daimyo of Nagaoka managed to procure 2 of the 3 Gatling guns in Japan and 2,000 modern French rifles from the German weapons dealer Henry Schnell. In May 1868, the daimyo of Nagaoka inflicted high losses on the imperial troops in the Battle of Hokuetsu, but his castle ultimately fell on May 19. Imperial troops continued to progress north, defeating the Shinsengumi at the Battle of Bonari Pass, which opened the way for their attack on the castle of Izu Wakamatsu in the Battle of Izu in October 1868, thus making the position in Sendai untenable. The coalition crumbled, and on October 12, 1868, the fleet left Sendai for Hokkaido, after having acquired 2 more ships and about 1,000 more troops. Remaining shogunate troops under Otori Keisuke, Shinsengumi troops under Hijikata Toshizo, the guerrilla corps under Hitomi Katsutaro, as well as several more French advisors. On October 26, Edo was renamed Tokyo, and the Meiji period officially started. Izu was besieged starting that month, leading to the mass suicide of the Byakutai young warriors. After a protracted month-long battle, Izu finally admitted defeat on November 6. Hokkaido Campaign. Creation of the Edo Republic following defeat on Honshu. Enomoto Takaki fled to Hokkaido with the remnants of the navy and his handful of French advisors. Together they organized a government, with the objective of establishing an independent island nation dedicated to the development of Hokkaido. They formally established the Republic of Edo on the American model, Japan's only ever republic, and Enomoto was elected as president. With a large majority, the Republic tried to reach out to foreign legations present in Hakodate, such as the Americans, French, and Russians, but was not able to garner any international recognition or support. Enomoto offered to confer the territory to the Tokugawa shogun under imperial rule, but his proposal was declined by the Imperial Governing Council. During the winter, they fortified their defenses around the southern peninsula of Hakodate, with the new fortress of Goryo-Kaku at the center. The troops were organized under Franco-Japanese command, the commander-in-chief Otori Keisuke being seconded by the French captain Jules Brunet, and divided between 4 brigades. Each of these was commanded by a French non-commissioned officer, and were themselves divided into 8 half-brigades, each under Japanese command. Final losses and surrender. The Imperial Navy reached the harbor of Miyako on March 20, but anticipating the arrival of the Imperial ships, the Edo rebels organized a daring plan to seize the Kotetsu. Led by Shinsengumi commander Hijikata Toshizo, 3 warships were dispatched for a surprise attack in what is known as the Battle of Miyako Bay. The battle ended in failure for the Tokugawa side, owing to bad weather, engine trouble and the decisive use of a Gatling gun by Imperial troops against samurai boarding parties. Imperial forces soon consolidated the hold on mainland Japan, and, in April 1869, dispatched a fleet and an infantry force of 7,000 to Edo, starting the Battle of Hakodate. The Imperial forces progressed swiftly and won the naval engagement at Hakodate Bay, Japan's first large-scale naval battle between modern navies, as the fortress of Goryo-Kaku was surrounded with 800 remaining men. Seeing the situation had become desperate, the French advisors escaped to a French ship stationed in Hakodate Bay at Coetlogon, under the command of Dupetit Thowers, from where they were shipped back to Yokohama and then France. The Japanese requested that the French advisors be given judgment in France. However, due to popular support in France for their actions, the former French advisors in Japan were not punished for their actions. Enomoto had resolved to fight to the end, and had sent his valuables to his adversary for safekeeping. These included the naval codes he had brought brought back from Holland, which he entrusted to the general of the imperial troops, Kuro de Kiyotaka. But Otori convinced him to surrender, telling him that deciding to live through defeat is the truly courageous way. If it's dying you want, you can do it anytime. Enomoto surrendered on June 27, 1869, accepting the Meiji Emperor's rule, and the Edo Republic ceased to exist. Aftermath. Following victory, the new government proceeded with unifying the country under a single, legitimate and powerful rule by the Imperial Court. The Emperor's residence was effectively transferred from Kyoto to Edo at the end of 1868, and the city renamed to Tokyo. The military and political power of the domains was progressively eliminated, and the domains themselves were soon transformed into prefectures, whose governors were appointed by the emperor. A major reform was the effective expropriation and abolition of the samurai class, allowing many samurai to change into administrative or entrepreneurial positions, but forcing many others into poverty. The southern domains of Satsuma, Chōshū and Tosa, having played a decisive role in the victory, occupied most of the key posts in government for several decades following the conflict, a situation sometimes called the Meiji Oligarchy, and formalized with the institution of the Genro. In 1869, the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo was built in honor of the victims of the Boshin War. Some leading partisans of the former shogun were imprisoned, but narrowly escaped execution. This clemency derives from the insistence of Saigo Takamori and Iwakura Tomomi, although much weight was placed on the advice of Parkes, the British envoy. He had urged Saigo, in the words of Ernest Satow, that severity towards Keikia, his supporters, especially in the way of personal punishment, would injure the reputation of the new government in the opinion of European powers. Quote, after 2 or 3 years of imprisonment, most of them were called to serve the new government, and several pursued brilliant careers. Enomoto Takaki, for instance, would later serve as an envoy to Russia and China and as the education minister. The imperial side did not pursue its objective to expel foreign interests from Japan, but instead shifted to a more progressive policy aiming at the continued modernization of the country and the renegotiation of unequal treaties with foreign powers. Later, under the "rich country, strong army" motto, the shift in stance towards the foreigners came during the early days of the Civil War. On April 8, 1868, new signboards were erected in Kyoto that specifically repudiated violence against foreigners. During the course of the conflict, Emperor Meiji personally received European envoys, first in Kyoto, then later in Osaka and Tokyo. Also unprecedented was Emperor Meiji's reception of Alfred, Duke of Edinburgh, in Tokyo, as his equal in point of blood. Although the early Meiji era witnessed a warming between the imperial court and foreign powers, relations with France temporarily soured due to the initial support by France for the shogun. Soon, however, a second military mission was invited to Japan in 1874, and a third one in 1884. A high level of interaction resumed around 1886, when France helped build the Imperial Japanese Navy's first large-scale modern fleet, under the direction of naval engineer Louis-Émile Bertin. The modernization of the country had started during the last years of the shogunate, and the Meiji government ultimately adopted the same policy. Upon his coronation, Meiji issued his charter oath, calling for deliberative assemblies, promising increased opportunities for the common people, abolishing the evil customs of the past, and seeking knowledge throughout the world to strengthen the foundations of imperial rule. Prominent reforms of the Meiji government included the 1871 abolition of the domain system, by which the feudal domains and the hereditary rulers were replaced by prefectures with governors appointed by the emperor. Others included the introduction of compulsory schooling and the abolition of Confucian class distinctions. The reforms culminated in the 1889 issuance of the Meiji Constitution. However, despite the support given to the Imperial Court by samurai, many of the early Meiji reforms were seen as detrimental to their interests. The creation of a conscript army made of commoners, as well as the loss of hereditary prestige and stipends, antagonized many former samurai. Tensions ran particularly high in the south, leading to the 1874 Saga Rebellion and a rebellion in Chōshū in 1876. Former samurai in Satsuma, led by Saigutaka Mori, who had left government over foreign policy differences, started the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877. Fighting for the maintenance of the samurai class and a more virtuous government, the slogan was, "New Government, High Morality." It ended with a heroic but total defeat at the Battle of Shiroyama.